My name is Claudia Coenen, and when I think about introducing myself, there are so many different ways I could do that. I could tell you what I do. I could tell you who I am, and I don't really think there's all that much difference between those things. So I'll start by saying I am a creative, expressive person, and I've been wanting to express the feelings inside my body and the thoughts and everything that I read and everything that I think about in many different ways since I was a really little girl. And when I was a child, I expressed myself through movement. And that led me to become a dancer and a choreographer. And I also played music with my family when I was growing up. So I expressed myself through the songs that I sang and the things that were meaningful in that. And it was very interesting to grow up amongst a whole group of folk singers and to travel around and perform. And it's really a cool way to grow up. At least I thought so. I always danced, and I continued to dance well into my 40s. And while I married and started a family. And so I was very involved in my kids' education and helping them express themselves and helping them learn and explore the world. And as I got older, dancing was beginning to hurt. So I started a catering business. So then I was a caterer, and I was making food and parties and gatherings and weddings for people. And again, it was very creative, although it was backstage creativity. Then in 2005, when my husband died, suddenly I was completely shattered and my whole world was broken. But I had these skills of creative expression to use. So I immediately was journaling and moving with my feelings and drawing, which was something I'd never done before. I did a lot of embroidery. I did a lot of anything that would express the feelings inside of me and help me process this, and a longing to want to get back to feeling whole again. And so I went back to school and got a degree in transpersonal psychology with a focus on creativity. And in the second year of my master's program, I started to study grief. So I went to the advanced grief counseling certificate program at Brooklyn College, and I was advised to join the Association for Death Education and Counseling and become certified in Thanatology and to present at the conferences. So I was launched into this new field of becoming a grief counselor, and I wanted to become a creative grief counselor. I wanted to synthesize everything that I knew about creative expression and then to learn more things. So I've studied a lot of other expressive therapies and art therapy techniques, even though I didn't get a degree in that. And I employ all of those things, including my ability to read body language, which is just a natural sidebar of being a dancer. And I became a grief counselor. So I got a job in a hospice in New Jersey, and I worked there for almost 4 years. And I really, really learned how to counsel on the ground. That was really where I learned how to do that. And then I started a private practice. So now I have a private practice in Hudson, New York, and I write books about creative expression and how to use our innate creative abilities, whether it's just to reframe the story that we're telling about what happened, to look at our lives in a different way, to develop a different view of how we want to live, and also to bring aspects of the person that we've lost through us into the world in a way of continuing the bonds with them. It's so deeply personal. So, a person who accesses through music, as that's one channel that I use, I find listening to music that my first husband and I danced to, and to put on this one song. It's a Lonnie Liston Smith jazz piece called Expansions. And we used to put it on and dance around the kitchen to that. We'd actually dance to everything. But when I put that one on, I really feel what it was like to dance with him. And occasionally I'll close my eyes and I'll imagine that he's behind me. He had this funny way of wiggling his hips, So I'll do that. I'll mimic that. And then I'll just imagine his arms around me. So that's one way to use music and movement. I'm a lifelong journaler. So a way of connecting with the person is to write in your journal, if you can access that. Many people say, I wish I could talk to them. I want to tell them things and I can't, and I long for that. And that led me to create some journal prompts to help people connect with their loved one and also to connect with how they feel. And they became the Karuna cards, because originally they were just 5 slips of paper. But using prompts can help you find your way into that connection. Creativity doesn't have to be, I made a painting, or I made, this is a movement that I made about it, or I wrote, an essay. It could just be changing the way that you look at something to a different way of looking at it, a different way of speaking about it. I felt when Albie died, I felt there was a neon sign over my head flashing, tragedy, widow, tragedy. And I definitely spent a lot of time leading with, my husband just died. So I was definitely in that I am a widow place. And then after a while, I was like, I don't want to just tell people immediately that's not who I am. It's a part of who I am, but it's not who I am. So, but we have to sort of go through that to get to a place where we can say, oh, let me be more of a full human when I meet people. It's just part of my story. Of course, there is not. There is only the way that a person is grieving, and whatever that is the right way for that moment. And that changes, because I've had clients come in and they say, oh, I should be crying all the time. What's wrong with me? I'm not grieving. Or they say, I can't stop crying. What's wrong with me? I should be over this by now. So the shoulds is one of the problems, this idea that we're somehow doing things wrong. And it's so common. And even I, as a person who's been in the field for 14, 15 years and has studied thanatology and become a fellow in thanatology, I have 3 certifications, and I'm in a year of grief right now. I'm in 19 months after the death of my second husband, and I feel that way sometimes. I feel like I shouldn't be feeling this bad. And then I watch myself like, oh yeah, that's just what everybody feels. And you feel what you feel. So that's one thing. There is no right way to do it. There are no stages of grief. There's no tasks. There's no, this is how you do it this way, or, even doing it this way. It's just whatever feels right for you. The creativity piece, what I run into more with sort of people who have not expressed themselves in that way, they're like, oh, I'm not creative. I can't do that. And so to them, I would just be like, it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself creative, because we're not making art here. We may actually be making something that could be conceived as art. We might be making a collage, or we might draw, or we might, do other things, but we're not interested in the product. We don't have a goal of making something that we can hang on the wall or show to other people. We're exploring the process of using these nonverbal techniques to allow ourselves to experience more deeply the grief that we're feeling, and more holistically. So we can certainly talk about it a lot. And, I'm a big talker. So yeah, I'll talk the whole time. We'll talk with my client, let them talk the whole session if that's what they feel like doing. But they might say a metaphor. I might suddenly have an image. Like, here's an example. This happened early in my work when I was in hospice. A woman came in and she said, oh, I just feel so terrible. I think my grief is like a whirlpool and I'm just being sucked down into it. And I said, oh, and I got up and I gave her a piece of paper and a box of crayons and said, what color is the whirlpool? And she just looked at me like, I was like, just, yeah, what color is the whirlpool? So she said it was black. So she picked a black crayon. I said, okay, draw the whirlpool. And she just made this like rudimentary swirl on the page. And I said, where are you? And what color are you? So she picked a different color for herself and she made a dot in the center. I said, yeah, how are you going to get out of that? She tried to make it go straight, but you can't do that in a whirlpool because it's going to continue to suck you in. And so I mentioned that, you kind of have to go around. Can somebody help you? She said, oh yeah, maybe there's a lifeguard on the shore. So she put like another X for this other person. I said, well, what does that person have? He has a hook. So she drew the hook and then she made herself a spiral around to get out. And when she was done, she was like, I feel so much lighter. And I never did anything like that. And that was so strange to do it, but it feels really good. So it was a simple response to a metaphor that she brought up. And then we made that metaphor visual. And in the process of her doing that, her mind, her heart, her soul, her body had a different experience. And she probably didn't feel so deeply that she was being sucked into a whirlpool after that. The difference between bereavement, which is the grief that we feel after someone dies, and the anticipatory grief is that we're experiencing similar feelings. It's still grief. We feel the loss, we feel the upheaval, the emotions of it, but the person's still there. So we have, if we can take it, and if you have a good counselor that can help you do this, you have an opportunity to perhaps say what needs to be said when the person's alive. And that's something that's a piece of anticipatory grief that I think is really important. And not everybody can get there. So, but it's useful to try when you have that time. And I certainly use the time between my husband's diagnosis and his death to do that. Like, let's clean up whatever we haven't cleaned up here, because you're dying and I want you to die in peace. So I had a personal opportunity to do that. The other weird thing about anticipatory grief, especially if it happens over a long period of time, if the bereaved person is caregiving for a long time and it's a slow decline and a long terminal illness, is that there's a sense that once the person dies, well, we know they're going to die, so we're probably not going to grieve as hard afterwards. And that's not always the case. It can be, but it isn't always the case. I would say that one thing that is different is that there's almost always a sense of shock when somebody dies. But when you know that they're going to die, oftentimes the shock doesn't last as long. When you have a sudden death, you're in shock for much longer. And having experienced both of those scenarios, I'm very aware of the difference. I also think that we have to remember that it changes over time, that the early parts of grief where we're in the mud of it and the horrible, unsettling emotions, that's not going to last forever. I mean, it may come back at various times throughout the rest of your life, and it probably won't come back with such force as time goes on. But we do learn to re-engage with the world. We have to, because we have jobs and we have kids and we have people. We have to do it. We might do it with resistance, but we still have to do it. And then gradually we learn to sort of get more comfortable with the state of our lives now. I think that's important to recognize. There's no one way to grieve. There's no one way to live afterwards. But when I was in my master's program and in the early parts of my loss with Albie, I really thought of the gifts that he gave me. And my master's thesis was called Consider the Gifts. And I think that's one way to look at it. But some people don't like that word. And in Heather Stang's new book, the one that's coming out in November, she says, grief may not be a gift, but it is an invitation. And I think that that's a really nice way to look at it. It's an invitation to whatever, an invitation to explore it, an invitation to explore who you are now, an invitation to discover who you want to be. What parts of yourself do you want to bring forward? What parts are like, I don't really need to be like that. How can I work through that? And sort of like subtly shift the way that I relate to people. And I think the idea of it being an invitation is a really cool way to look at it. So I think I actually have always been curious about how we get through this and how we find our way to live fully again. And I do write about it in Shattered by Grief, where I'm really grappling with becoming whole again. And I use the word whole, the letters of the word whole for the chapter headings, like who am I, what happened, how do I get through this, opening to emotion, learning to live fully again, and exploring the past to experience the future, which are the continuing bonds. But this L one, learning to live fully again, now that I've experienced another death and I'm got this label of double widow now, I'm really leaning into this bigger question. What is it about some people that really can discover their resilience, can sort of very effectively find their way through and grapple with the loss and the tragedy of it, and still find a way to rebuild their lives? And we all have to do that because we're still alive. But some of us do it more effectively than others. And some of us have skills that we can tap into. And for some, it's really hard. And that's okay. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. But the larger question is, what about the people who can't? Because there are people who just can't seem to get through that. And there are people who hurt themselves, who complete suicide. There are people who cannot move on. Here they are. They're a deck of prompts. And as I said, they started out as 5 little slips of paper. So one of them was the prompt that I just read you, and the others were just journal prompts, because I've always journaled, I was recommending that to my clients. Well, you could write in your journal, and here's a journal for you to use. And many people were like, oh, I don't even know where to begin. So I thought, let me come up with some prompts. So at first they were 5 pieces of paper, and then I made 20, and I tried to print them on, those business cards that you run through your printer, which was, sort of worked, didn't always work. But I had this little stack of 20 cards, and I could pull them out of my purse and say, here, pick one. When I was a choreographer, I used to use random choice in my improvisational work to develop a piece. So I just think it's magical when you just pick something and you don't know what you're going to pick. So they went from 20 cards to, I think, 25 or 30, and I printed them up at a printer and put them in a box and took them to ADEC and gave a talk on them, and people really wanted them. And so when I lost the job at the hospice, I decided to write a book, and I decided that I wanted to publish these cards. So when my publisher said yes and gave me a contract for the cards, by that time they were 40 cards. So then we said, well, a deck of cards is 52. So we took them up to 52. So they're all different things. They are prompts for journaling, but they're also like, here's one. And this sort of speaks to how we should grieve, and we shouldn't feel this way or we should feel that way. So a lot of people feel angry when somebody dies. And I was very angry at Albie for dying. And of course, that was ridiculous because he had a heart attack 4 days after his 50th birthday. It wasn't his fault. He didn't abandon me, but I felt abandoned and I was angry. And, I didn't want to be a single mother. It was not, what was supposed to happen. Anger and I are old friends. And I decided that I wanted to explore my anger. And so this ended up in a card that says, anger is often labeled a bad emotion, yet anger has some positive motivating qualities. How do you express anger? When does it arise? What words does it use? How does it affect your body? What color is it? Write your anger out in this color. So this card gives people permission to feel that very loud and like buzzing kind of anger. That's how it shows up in my body, and to express it. So that means like writing it out in your journal in bright red or whatever color. And, I have some journal pages from early on that are just the F word scrawled across the page in bright red, because that's how I felt. And whenever we do that, whenever we release a feeling in a different way, sure, talking about it helps, but releasing it really in a bigger way, physically or through drawing or writing in a different color, it takes it out of our body, and then we can have a conversation with it. In the creative toolkit for working with grief and bereavement, I've developed 30 worksheets, and there's one that's called Emotion in the Palm of Your Hand, and it's simply a picture of a hand, an open palm. And the invitation is to see whatever emotion's arising, whether it's anger or maybe it's pain or hurt, and say, oh, I'm going to put you in the palm of my hand. And then you can say, oh, hello, hurt. Why are you here? What do you have to tell me? And just that metaphorical separation from what's in my body over to here. And then we start to have a conversation. And then I can say, you know what? Thank you so much. I'm going to put you down for a while. And of course, it's going to come back, but it's just another way of working through these things and these feelings. The emotions of grief are so messy. So any way that you can get them out of your body and express them is going to be helpful. So my second husband said, I feel so unsettled and unmoored, and I don't know how to do what I need. I need to have some solid ground under my feet. And he was a practicing Buddhist, and he just turned to me and he said, the groundlessness is the ground. And I hated that. I was so upset. I didn't want to hear that because I wanted to have some control. But it sort of makes sense. The groundless ground refers to the impermanence of life. It refers to the fact that we think we know what will happen next, and then we discover that we don't. This is startling and unsettling, and if we become anxious about it, we try to resist. Resistance causes a stiffening of the body, a tightness in the chest and neck. Resistance causes us to wrap our arms around ourselves in protection. This very resistance, this rigid attempt to be strong and upright, even though the ground is roiling, can very likely cause us to fall. You cannot regain your balance if you're inflexible. And I think that's one of the keys to how we get through grief. We have to be able to sort of allow ourselves to be buffeted by it. Maybe we're going to be thrown off our center. Maybe we're going to feel like we're falling into an abyss. I have a card that recommends we just sit on the edge of the abyss and dangle our feet until we're ready to slip in and remember we know how to swim. So there's so many different ways that we can get through it, but trying to be strong or to push it aside, it might work for a little while, but ultimately it's going to come back up and call for our attention. Yes, I have done work with disenfranchised grief, which is just a beautiful descriptive phrase that was coined by Ken Doka. Disenfranchised grief is a grief that is not typically seen. So it's a grief maybe that not over a person who died, or this is not so much the case anymore, but if you were in a gay relationship and your person died, people would not acknowledge it. Suicide is another one. Surviving suicide is another one that tends to be stigmatized and disenfranchised, although that also is getting less and less stigmatized. I have worked with disenfranchised grief through the Straight Spouse Network, which was quite interesting. I went to a summit and I was also appeared on the Straight Spouse podcast. So that's a grief where when a couple is married and one of them comes out as gay, and there's so many different permutations how that can happen. It can happen publicly, and then there's a choice Some people actually do choose to stay together. That's much more rare. People tend to get divorced. And then there's all kinds of feelings about it. There's could be a feeling of, yes, I celebrate you being who you are, who you want to be. And then there's feelings of recrimination and guilt. And also, the spouse in that case, the straight spouse in that case, often has feelings, no matter how it's handled, whether it's accepted or not. They have feelings about what was this relationship? Was this real? Did this person really love me? And how could they hide who they were for so long, even from themselves? And why didn't I see it? And there's all those other, it's very complicated. Disenfranchised grief is very complicated. So you have to kind of parse through all of those complicated feelings almost before you can actually address the grief itself. But one thing that I found, the most recent straight spouse that I worked with definitely was on board with her husband's transition to becoming a woman, and he thought that they had such a good marriage that naturally they would stay together. And she thought, I don't want to be with a woman, and so I can't be with you. And she found herself physically upset as she saw women's clothes in his laundry basket, because when he was still living at home. Eventually she moved out, and he was really shocked that she didn't want to stay married to him. And she was really shocked that he didn't understand why she didn't want to. So we had to really parse through those feelings. But the other thing that she really needed from me was permission to feel the grief over the loss of her marriage and the loss of the assumptions that of how she thought it would be. And that's all part of the disenfranchisement. Unfortunately, so many people in a disenfranchised situation have to put up with everybody else's shoulds. Another example is in a divorce situation, say people have gotten divorced and then both partners have remarried, and then one of the exes dies. And then the original partner feels a lot of feelings about that. Some people think, well, that's weird. You were divorced. Why would you feel anything? But emotions don't work like that. You said at the beginning that there's, in some cultures, people think you should never get over grief. The fact is that you don't ever get over grief. We live in a culture that thinks, okay, great, done. How many? 6 months? Okay, you're done. Or if you're in a corporation, you got 3 days. So, we don't understand the peaks and valleys of grief and the ebb and flow of it and the messiness that continues. I mean, Albie's been gone for 19 years, and I don't long for him the way that I did. I did fall in love again and remarry. That did not affect the feelings that I had or the bonds that I continued to have with him and will have for the rest of my life. He's the father of my children. He didn't get to see them get married. He didn't get to see the grandchildren. We need him in our lives. And I'm sure that I'm going to feel the same way about the second one too. It is the death of a relationship and what you had thought you were going to have and what you thought you were building. And that does require some grief work. So the one reason why you're hearing this more is because I think part of it is the pandemic, because there was so much grief around and we didn't even know what the grief was. We were grieving the loss of everyday life. We were grieving the fact that our kids couldn't go to school or that we couldn't visit our loved one who was possibly dying in a hospital, or if somebody did die, whether they died of COVID or they just died during that time, we couldn't have the natural, typical ways that we would mourn, the rites that we know. And I was on a panel of over 100 grief and funeral professionals to kind of brainstorm at the very beginning of the pandemic, to brainstorm a resource guide to help people with all of this. It's called the COVID paper. You can find it. covidpaper.org. We put it together and wrote this big compendium of resources. That's one reason I think why we're hearing more about non-death loss. Also, Professor Dr. Darcy Harris has been doing a tremendous amount of research on non-death loss and teaches classes in that. And then my dear friend Heather Stang, she's a yoga grief therapist. She has written a book which is coming out in November that's called Navigating Loss, and it is about non-death loss. And she writes in there, I just reviewed the book, she writes in there about estrangement, about divorce, about job loss, about all these other kinds of things that bring up grief responses that do need to be included in our discussion about grief and in our ways of helping each other. And Heather's books are great because she is a yoga therapist, so she has a lot of yoga techniques and sort of really simple breathing and light meditation techniques that help you get through things. I want to say just one more thing about the pandemic and about the conversation about grief that is more prevalent today. You're seeing it in articles, in newspapers. People are talking about it more. This may sound a little crazy, but I think that if Barbie can have existential thoughts of death and a billion people watch this movie, it just brings it into the mainstream. And that was for me, that was the best part of the Barbie movie, which I thought was hilarious. Because we need to be talking about it, and we need, if a doll can talk about it, we all need to be talking about it. So I think that's important. Not only are we not taught how to do it, there's a sort of a societal damper on asking for help, on really expressing those really hard feelings inside. Maybe if I tell you how bad I feel, I'm going to burden you in some way. And in a way that I'm so sorry for your loss, let me know if you need anything, is really almost like, I'm over here, but I'm not really coming towards you. So I don't know how to bridge that gap. This happened recently with one of my neighbors. They say they sent me that kind of message. I thought they only said, "Oh," when I said that my husband had died. And I've been sitting on the other side of the fence between our properties feeling really bad. Like, why haven't they come around and knocked on the door? And so even if they did send me that message, let me know if I can help you, when they didn't hear from me, why didn't they come over and say, hey, we just made cookies. Would you like some? Or something. I'm going to the store. Do you need anything? And so it turns out that they were thinking, because I didn't reach out to them, they were thinking, oh, she doesn't want anything from us, which speaks to not an understanding of grief at all on their part. So we've actually talked about this recently, and I think I thought we cleared it up, but I haven't heard from them since that conversation. So I think they're maybe a little bit death averse. Why do we only have to do things when we're comfortable? And this is a really uncomfortable situation. Grief is uncomfortable. Death is uncomfortable. An upheaval in your life, life quakes, tragedies. These are really uncomfortable places to be. And we have those things happen in our lives all the time, or in the lives of people that we know. And do we only reach out when we feel comfortable? We have to get over that, because I may not know what you need. I may not know what I can do for you. But if I ask, what do you need today? Do you need me to get you some milk? Do you need me to come for a walk? Do you need me to leave you alone? And to be okay with whatever you say. We not only do we need to be talking about death, we need to get over being uncomfortable about it. If you say to somebody, let me know if you need something, and then you never text them again, that doesn't work either. You need to just reach out again and remember that they're grieving, they're lost, they might need help, or maybe not, but find out. Or maybe they just need to know that you're there and thinking of them.